news just in. You are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. CNN Center right now is just beginning.
I have another one. Another plane just hit. Right? Oh my God! Another plane.
It's blowing right now. You got people running up the street.
And there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon. It would appear that there
Man, people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows. Like,
The firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
Another plane has crashed, this one about 80 miles south of Pittsburgh.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed. It folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
just landing only a few minutes ago at Andrews Air Force Base, returning to the White House, getting ready to address the nation around 9 p.m.
Never imagined was going to occur on his watch, was to test his leadership qualities.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
My name is Laurie Van Auken. My husband, Kenneth Van Auken, was killed on September 11th at the World Trade Center. He was on the 105th floor of the North Tower, which was the first building that was hit and the second building to collapse.
My name is Patricia Casaza. I lost my husband, John Casaza. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of the first tower.
My name is Mindy Kleinberg, and I lost my husband, Alan. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of the North Tower.
I got a message from him on the morning of September 11th saying that, I love you, I'm in the World Trade Center, the building was hit by something, I don't know if I'm gonna get out, but I love you very much and I hope I see you later, bye. And I didn't make it to the phone on time to speak with him. I tried calling him back, and I was never able to reach him, so I never spoke to him again.
I was actually doing laundry when I got a call from my husband. And he had thought that a bomb had gone off in his building. And by the time he had called me, he had checked all those avenues and said that you know, the floor is already filling up with a thick black smoke, and I don't think we're gonna make it. He said, you know, I love you, tell John that I love him, our son.
On September 11th, 2001, 2,972 people from more than 80 countries were killed, leaving thousands of loved ones behind. While grieving continued for many, some began to move beyond their personal pain.
My husband's service was in October, and then I think I went into angry mode, and that's when I started to question everything.
I spent a lot of time on the computer. I started reading every single article that I could get my hands on.
I mean, there was no sleeping at the beginning because We were grieving, it was hard to lay down. So I would spend all night just researching.
I want to meet with the NSA, CIA, and the FBI together in one room.
Out of the many who were researching on their own, 4 widowed mothers found each other. New Jersey residents Mindy Kleinberg, Patty Casaza, Lori Van Auken, along with Kristen Breitweiser, became known as the Jersey Girls.
We became friends and like-minded. We all had questions. We all had questions, and we wanted answers.
At the top of the family's growing list of questions, why had the U.S. military defenses failed to stop any of the 4 hijacked planes?
The FAA alerted U.S. air defense units of a possible hijacking at 8:38 Tuesday morning.
The last plane was reported to have crashed in Pennsylvania just after 10 a.m.
That's almost 2 hours, you know, where planes were flying around the skies of the United States with no military response.
Coming across an article in a Canadian paper, the Jersey widows learned it had been a routine for NORAD, the military apparatus in charge of air defense, to scramble fighters to intercept planes during suspected emergencies.
Fatal accident involving a Learjet flying across
The women recalled one such incident that was heavily reported in 1999.
Just 25 minutes into the flight, controllers lost radio contact with the pilots, and an Air Force F-16 on a training mission was sent to take a look. Ultimately, 6 military jets gave chase. The plane was tracked by the FAA on radar. At high levels, the military, even the White House, discussed what to do.
Tell me what the difference was between those times and the day of September 11th.
They wondered about the lack of immediate response by the president and his Secret Service detail. President Bush was in a Florida elementary school classroom that morning, where he sat for more than 7 minutes after being informed of the second attack.
The Secret Service has an arrangement with the FAA. They had open lines after the World Trade Center.
Tracking it by radar.
And under these circumstances, they just move. They don't say, sir, or ask politely. They came in and said, sir, we have to leave immediately, and grabbed me and
literally grabbed you and moved you.
Yeah.
Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans.
If people fell down on the jobs by not informing those who were in leadership positions, who had the power to do something, why were we not looking at what our protocols were there so that we could fix it going forward?
Our families didn't want us asking these questions. That was painful. We should, just be grieving and healing. Well, part of our healing process is finding out exactly what happened.
We really were looking for answers feverishly at the beginning, and there was very little information being put out through the major media that answered our questions. There were just more questions. Every time we would look into something, we'd have more questions.
One article led to a question that begat another question that begat another question, and when you couldn't thread them together and you couldn't come to an answer that made sense, we started to catalog our questions.
The families raised questions about the track record of the FBI and the elusive search for justice after 9/11.
I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice.
Throughout the week after the attack, there were numerous accounts that the hijackers had a large number of accomplices in the United States.
75 individuals who are currently detained, over 480 people arrested, nearly 1,000 individuals.
The families waited for the 9/11 trials to begin, but they never came. After the public spectacle of roundups, the Justice Department quietly let the suspects go, one by one. A year later, the families would learn that only 6 of the original detainees were still in custody, and none had been charged with any terrorist act.
The FBI continuously was changing agents who were on the investigation. When you're trying to connect the dots, you need continuity.
Journalist Gail Sheehy spent months with the 4 widows.
They wanted to find that more was done and was going to be done, but they kept finding that less was being done.
We printed articles, copied them.
By November, it had become the sense among most 9/11 families that an independent investigation would be necessary to do what the Justice Department and the news media seemed unwilling to do.
We felt that the country was at risk from terrorists and from incompetence, and maybe worse.
They get a little outside Washington, they stop at a red light, and they began wriggling out of their capri pants and putting on their nice little skirts and suits so they could go around all the offices of Congress, bedevil these members of Congress and say, what are you doing about this?
Soon, a 9/11 Commission bill was being sponsored in Congress.
Senator Tom Daschle said last week that you called him several times and urged him not to investigate the events of September 11th.
Tom's wrong. He has, I think, in this case, well, let's say a misinterpretation.
He said on one occasion that the president asked him to do that at a breakfast meeting. Are you now saying that they weren't asking to block an investigation?
Lori was an independent. Mindy was definitely a Democrat. Actually, Kristen and myself voted for President Bush in the first election. And yet, even though he should have been our biggest advocate, he turned into one of our biggest adversaries.
We still don't know what happened in those buildings.
The Jersey widows were not the only ones seeking answers and becoming frustrated. In New York, Sally Reaganhard, who had lost her firefighter son Christian in the building's collapse, was forming the Skyscraper Safety Campaign.
The 911 emergency tapes and recordings, plus 500 interviews done with the fire department right after 9/11. All that material has been withheld from the public.
Sally partnered with widow Monica Gabrielle, who lost her husband Richard at the World Trade Center.
Why did the buildings fall? How could skyscrapers just like crumble to the ground in 10 seconds?
Never before or since had fire caused a steel-framed building to collapse. World Trade Center Building Number 7, never hit by an airplane, also collapsed that evening.
Building 7 ablaze at the moment and apparently getting ready to collapse.
The largest structural collapse in world history, the largest loss of life on American soil since the Civil War, and not one governmental or elected official wanted to know why and how this happened.
Realizing strength in numbers, 9/11 families rallied at the Capitol to press for answers.
We need a full independent investigation. We must ask the tough questions and seek out the difficult answers. We must, as a country, grow and be made stronger and safer by the bitter lessons learned on September 11th.
We are asking you, America, to stand behind us. Please. I was terrified to talk in front of anybody. This is not something that any one of us had ever done before.
The rally united once isolated families. Bob McIlvaine, who lost his son Bobby, came from Philadelphia to join the group.
Being down Philly, it's like you're out of the loop. I was floundering by myself, just talking to people, trying to find anyone.
That was the first time we all got together in a new direction to push for the commission.
Sharing many of the same questions and concerns, a coalition of family members began to take form. Its goal, a formal investigation.
Call your congressman. Tell them that you want to be safe.
An investigation must not interfere with the ongoing efforts to prevent the next attack.
Frustrated with the attitude of the White House and seeming lack of interest from the public, the family members began actively seeking support from the news media. And given the persistence of the media's focus on pain and suffering, it was not difficult for the Jersey widows to get their attention.
You know, it was my private pain and my private story, and I really did not want to share that. But we made a conscious decision that we would start to say to them, okay, well, I will tell you about me personally if you talk about the fact that there's not an investigation.
I'm joined right now by 4 women who lost their husbands in the attacks.
Kristen Breitweiser is one of 4 New Jersey widows who lost. These women banded together after their husbands were killed, and now they're leading a campaign to find out exactly how did 9/11 happen.
And finally, the media began to report on our activities, not just the activities of the administration.
Forward to the president and the vice president going to both come in there.
To go on any show is not easy, but you needed the public pressure in order to make anything happen in Washington. I mean, they need huge public pressure to move them.
President Bush signed legislation today creating an independent commission to investigate the September 11th attack on America.
Buckling under pressure, the White House was finally agreeing to a deal.
He reversed himself under pressure.
But in a stunning series of revelations, it soon appeared that the White House was stacking the odds against an investigation it had not wanted in the first place.
The president named a supporter, Dr. Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State in the Nixon and Ford administrations, to head the panel.
He has a penchant for secrecy, which is not what's needed here. There are questions about his role in Vietnam, his role in the coup in Chile.
Several family members approached Kissinger and requested a meeting at his office in New York. Prior to the meeting, Kristen Breitweiser conducted a thorough investigation of Kissinger's potential conflicts of interest.
Probably much to the chagrin of some of the people in the room, Lori asked some very pointed questions. Would you have any Saudi American clients that you would like to tell us about? And he was very uncomfortable, kind of twisting and turning on the couch. And then she asked whether he had any clients by the name of Bin Laden. And he just about fell off his couch.
Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger stepped down from the position Friday.
We thought the meeting went well.
I wouldn't want to be in the way of some of these families. I mean, they're...
Kissinger was soon replaced by Tom Keene, a former New Jersey governor, and former Congressman Lee Hamilton, who had chaired the House Intelligence Committee. The remaining 8 commissioners were all former D.C. insiders and lawyers, evenly split between Republicans and Democrats.
Remember, in the 90s, they spent $100 million investigating Clinton's sexual exploits. $100 million. And they first allocated only $3 million to investigate the murder of 3,000 people.
The budget was eventually raised to $14 million, but the investigation was also given less time than they had wanted, a year and a half. To monitor the commission, leading victim relatives established the Family Steering Committee. The group provided the commissioners with hundreds of well-researched questions for which they expected answers.
That's the official start of our first public hearing of what is going to be an extraordinarily difficult and important job.
In March of 2003, 441 days after the attacks, the official investigation began in New York.
Very much, Mindy Kleinberg from September 11th Advocates.
On the morning of September 11th, my 3-year-old son Sam and I walked Jacob 10 and Lauren 7 to the bus stop at about 8:40 a.m.
Brad was 24 years old and the oldest of our 3 sons.
Family Steering Committee members were among the first to testify before the commission.
Hey Mom, it's Brad. Just wanted to call and let you know, I'm sure that you heard there were, or maybe you haven't heard, that a plane crashed into World Trade Center 1. We're fine, we're in World Trade Center 2. I'm obviously alive and well over here, but obviously a pretty scary experience. I saw a guy fall out of probably the 91st story all the way down. So you're welcome to give a call here. I think we'll be here all day. I'm not sure if the firm's going to shut down for the day or what, but give me a call back. I called Dad to let him know. Love you.
Welcome, Mayor Michael Bloomberg of the City of New York.
From the outset, many families were concerned by how the investigation was being conducted.
We begged and pleaded that people should be put under oath. At the beginning, they were not.
Will describe our city government.
As the hearings progressed, the families were becoming more and more frustrated by what they perceived as softball questioning from the commissioners.
I've appreciated already his remarks.
We have certain questions that we, the families, wrote for each of the people that were coming to testify today. And the questions weren't asked.
Complete waste of time. It was a bunch of people throwing accolades at each other and asking the same questions one after the other.
Skirting around issues, not being defined enough in their questions.
It's a stonewall. It's a cover-up. As far as I'm concerned, I'm very bitter. I'm very angry.
Still, no one was prepared for what they then uncovered about Philip Zelikow, the executive director of the 9/11 Commission.
He who had the power to say where the investigation was going, who would be interviewed, what would go into the 9/11 Commission report, what wouldn't.
We have found out that he not only served on the transition team of the Bush administration, that he was a person who wrote a draft memo for the setup of the Bush administration's National Security Council, that he was an individual who wrote the preemptive war strategy that was eventually used for the war in Iraq, that he is a close friend of Condoleezza Rice's. We want him to resign.
Philip Zelikow refused to resign, and Chairman Keene dismissed the family's concerns over conflicts of interest. Nearly a year in, the commission had only received a small amount of the documents that they had requested.
At this point, what we have is literally hundreds of boxes of materials that have come into the commission, and we have not sorted through that.
They gave them boxes and boxes of documents, but not left pertinent documents out.
A deal announced yesterday between the White House and the commission investigating the September 11th attacks is proving to be rather controversial. Under the agreement, only certain members of the commission will be allowed to review classified documents from the White House, and their notes will be subject to administration review.
I mean, I'm a member of the commission. The president has said only a minority of the commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the commission with the White House.
The only two commission members allowed direct access to the documents? Jamie Gorelick, the Deputy Attorney General under President Clinton, and Philip Zelikow.
I felt that the fix was in at that point in time.
The majority of the commission felt that it was better to see these documents rather than take a chance of not seeing them at all.
It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. This is important. We cannot do our responsibilities if we don't have all of us access to all the documents we need, including what's in the White House.
And with the investigation nearing its deadline, the President, Vice President, and National Security Advisor were still refusing to testify publicly. Yet few Americans were aware of the family's plight. Up till then, the hearings had received only minimal coverage. Suddenly, that all changed.
In testimony before the 9/11 Commission later this week, and in a new book to be published tomorrow, Against All Enemies, Clark will tell the story of what happened behind the scenes at the White House before, during, and after September 11th.
To the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, your government failed you. Those entrusted with protecting you failed you. And I failed you.
Mr. Clark is the first person that has apologized to the families.
Clark's testimony provided the families with the timely leverage they needed to increase public pressure on reluctant White House witnesses.
The Bush administration will allow National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice to testify publicly before the 9/11 Commission.
For President Bush, it was a dramatic reversal.
I've ordered this level of cooperation because I consider it necessary to gaining a complete picture of the months.
And even the President and Vice President agreed to meet with the Commission, but with a catch. They insisted on meeting together behind closed doors and not under oath.
President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
We have to have one story, so I'll say part, and if I get it wrong, hedge a little bit and give me the next.
I want to thank the chairman and vice chairman for giving us a chance to share views on different subjects. And they had a lot of good questions, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I took the time.
What topic did the commissioners want to spend most of the time on?
It's probably best that I not go into the details of the conversation.
The President and Vice President of the United States, don't you think they should be able to stand up and speak their own words?
They should go under oath.
They should be, yeah.
In public.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what